Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the DepDiv podcast. I'm Maple, your host, professional overthinker, and the only person who failed AP History twice and still got a podcast about geopolitics. If you're here for nuanced expert analysis, wrong show. If you're here for me comparing nuclear powers to your toxic exes, welcome home. Today we're doing what every cable news panel does after 3 espressos, taking modern wars and smashing them into old wars until they fit. We're looking at a brilliant piece from Foreign Affairs by Gideon Rose. He wrote this speculative framework from the vantage point of May 2026 to show how structural symmetries dictate conflict. We're going to see how a hypothetical modern intervention in Iran mirrors Vietnam and how the war in Ukraine is basically the Korean War all over again. Let's dive right into this darkly comedic reality.
Now look at this quote. In war, as in the market, the most dangerous words might be, "This time is different." This perfectly captures that naive wish-casting of wartime leaders. It's the geopolitical equivalent of looking at a walking red flag and saying, "I can fix him." Leaders constantly convince themselves that because we have cooler drones now, 20th century mistakes don't apply. They casually assume they can just roll in, military force will easily equal political gains, the enemy will roll over, and serious long-term planning is basically optional. But spoiler alert, structure constrains choices. When you ignore the blueprints of the past, you end up repeating them.
Section 1. The Quagmire, Vietnam and Iran.
Okay, let's look at the timeline for what we can affectionately call the messy extrication model. Back in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson incrementally dragged the US into Vietnam. Advisors, then bombing, then ground troops. It took agonizing years. But in this foreign affairs scenario for 2025 and 2026, a US-Israeli conflict with Iran is basically a speed run of that exact disaster. They impressively managed to sprint through all 5 years of LBJ's Vietnam pipeline in just 2 months. Entry, massive escalation, deeply frustrated stalemate, and desperate negotiations, all crammed into a single fiscal quarter.
And right here, you see the ultimate illusion of control. The scenario lays out airstrikes damaging Iran's nuclear program in June 2025, followed by a joint US-Israeli decapitation strike in February 2026. They buy into this total fantasy that taking off the top guy magically topples the regime. But guess what? The enemy gets a vote. Instead of fixing the problem permanently, you just get a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, succeeding his dad, and a massive global energy crisis because they restrict shipping at the Strait of Hormuz. The deeply rooted regime just absorbs the punch and keeps on ticking.
So, what do you do when the quick, easy victory completely fails? You panic and steal Richard Nixon's playbook. Enter the madman theory. Back in the day, Nixon tried to terrify North Vietnam into peace talks by acting so unhinged they'd think he'd literally do anything, even push the nuclear button. In our modern Iran scenario, the administration gets desperate, issues all these blustery ultimatums, and, predictable shocker, the Iranians do not blink. Why would they? Just like the North Vietnamese, they are stubbornly uncooperative and totally willing to bet they can win a long, painful contest of suffering.
The end result? No victory parades, folks. Just a frustrated superpower signing an unsatisfying, face-saving deal to stop the bleeding. In 1973, the U.S. got its prisoners of war back but left communist forces perfectly positioned to take South Vietnam. In 2026 Iran, shipping resumes in the Gulf, the shooting stops, but the actual core issues, the fate of Iran's nuclear program and the regime itself, are just punted to another day. You didn't solve it, you just paused it.
Section 2. The Meat Grinder, Korea and Ukraine. Now we pivot to the second archetype, wars of sudden invasion and violent seesawing. Look at the grim reality of the meat grinder. Whether it's North Korea crossing the 38th parallel in 1950 or Russia rolling into Ukraine in 2022, the tragic human sacrifice looks exactly the same. Both started as massive, surprise land grabs designed to conquer what the aggressors considered lost national territory, which immediately dragged the U.S. and its allies in to help the victim.
Let's talk structure, because despite all our modern drones, satellites, and precision tech, Ukraine's bones perfectly mirror Korea. Think about the Korean War's first year. North Koreans push all the way down, MacArthur pushes them all the way up, then Chinese troops enter and push them back down again. A violently swinging pendulum. Ukraine saw the exact same massive operational reversals in year 1. But after that initial chaos, both settle into this brutal, high-intensity trench warfare stalemate where neither side can deliver a knockout punch.
Just let this number sink in for a second. Hundreds of thousands. That is the staggering baseline number of combat deaths required to move a map line a few inches in a meat grinder war.
And that's not even counting the millions of civilian casualties. It is an extraordinary amount of violence expended for absolutely minimal territorial gains.
And because these massive efforts yield almost nothing, the ultimate conclusion is always the frozen armistice model. In Korea, they fought viciously for 2 years during negotiations just to sign an armistice right around where they started. Ukraine is structurally bound for a very similar fate, a frozen armistice that proves extremely durable precisely because the lines are so heavily guarded. The pattern is boring and brutal. Modern wars don't end, they fade. No surrender on a battleship, just a press release, a frozen line, and a new generation that has to Google why the map looks weird.
Section 3. The recurring punchlines.
Okay, so, across all these conflicts, we have these dark, universal constants. First off, superpowers absolutely love to threaten nuclear annihilation without following through. Truman, Nixon, Putin, whoever happens to be yelling at Iran. It's a bluff. But here is the deeply cynical reality. Threatening vulnerable nations ironically teaches them that getting an actual nuke is their only real insurance policy. A nuclear-armed North Korea is completely safe. A non-nuclear Iran, or a Ukraine that gave up its nukes in the 90s, gets attacked. The lesson is painfully obvious to the rest of the world.
And how do these proxy wars actually end? Well, when the big powers are exhausted and want out, they simply yank the leash. Washington forced Seoul to accept the Korean armistice. 20 years later, they forced Saigon to take the Vietnam withdrawal deal. And structurally, if Russia ever offers a real deal, or the US decides it's had enough in Iran, Washington will absolutely overrule Kiev, Israel, or the Gulf states to force a settlement. The great powers always run out of patience way before the junior partners run out of grievances.
Quick begging intermission. If you enjoy me insulting centuries of foreign policy in under 10 minutes, subscribe. Leave a review. 5 stars if you agree. 1 star if you're a government bot. I need the engagement. Either way. Tell a friend who thinks World War III starts next Tuesday. Anyway, despite all the think pieces screaming that the American empire is in terminal decline after every messy extrication, the geopolitical sky isn't falling. The cynical truth is the hegemon just shrugs off the embarrassment, wipes the blood off its chin, and bounces back for another few decades of global dominance.
So yeah, history repeats because we keep hiring the same type of arrogant men in suits to run it. If structure constrains choices, and history always rhymes, aren't we just volunteering to finance the next identical bloodbath by pretending this time is different? Massive thanks to my producer FireflyHaku, who is currently drawing battle plans on a pizza box and still insists the Maginote line just needed better marketing. I'm Maple. Stay cynical, stay curious, and remember, the next war will look exactly like the last one, only with more drones and worse press conferences. See you next week!